Defied out of spite. Start the shift half an hour later to save the company money? Alright then. At one factory where I worked, the shifts partially overlapped. People spent 8.5 hours at work, with half an hour being an unpaid lunch break and another half hour during the shift change used to pass on information. It was necessary to explain to the next shift what was happening with the equipment. One efficient manager calculated how much money could be saved if those extra half an hour during the shift change were eliminated. As a result, the paid working time was reduced to 7.5 hours. The responsibility for handing over the shift was placed on the foreman, even though the amount of information was such that one person simply couldn't handle it. Then classic malicious compliance began. I started arriving exactly at the new shift start time. I walk into the workshop and everything is at a standstill. The operators are waiting for me. I'm the technician and the foreman to figure out what to do next. Instead of continuous operation, the equipment sits idle for at least half an hour. The foreman, furious, asks why I don't come in earlier. I calmly reply, I don't work for free. Very quickly, the other shifts picked up on this too. People who used to come in early also stopped doing that. Production, as expected, dropped. Management started looking into what the problem was. Of course, they tried to pin the role of instigator on me, but no one could force us to work for free. A week later, they rolled everything back and restored the old schedule. Denied reimbursement of expenses. Fine, then you'll pay 3 times as much. I live in the UK and often travel to the head office by train for work. Usually I get to the station by public transport. I live quite near a stop and just pay these small expenses myself, but once, shortly after I first moved in, I decided to drive to the station and leave my car in the parking lot. I needed to get to a meeting quickly after returning, and having my car would make it easier. As a responsible employee, I submitted an expense report, including the parking fee, £20, which was noticeably more expensive than my usual public transport fare. I was already expecting reimbursement, but instead I received a letter. According to the travel expense policy, I am not allowed to claim any expenses related to driving my own car, unless I first fill out a special driving for work form and provide updated insurance documents confirming that my car is insured at my own expense for business trips. Not just for my regular daily commute, which essentially this trip was. Well, fine, I thought to myself. You can keep those £20 for yourselves. But if you want to strictly follow the policy, okay, let's play by the rules. Suddenly, it turned out that trains lasting 2 hours and 52 minutes no longer suited me, so I started booking slightly longer ones, 3 hours and 4 minutes. Which means, according to that same policy, I am now entitled to travel first class. And since the journey takes more than 3 hours, I'm now entitled to an overnight stay, that is, a hotel and dinner reimbursement since I'm away from home. And of course, reasonable transportation expenses, including taxis at inconvenient times. So instead of a bus at 6 in the morning, now I have an Uber at 6:30, and instead of a bus at 10 p.m., it's also an Uber. About £40 per trip, which is about 10 times more than I used to pay for public transport. As a result, because of those £20, I increased the company's expenses for each trip to the head office by more than 3 times, simply by following their own beloved travel expense policy. Accused of stealing electricity from the employer. For almost 20 years, I worked as a night security guard in office buildings while simultaneously drafting my novels. During breaks between patrols and other duties, I would sit at my post, type on my iPad with a Bluetooth keyboard, and charge everything from the outlets there. Footnote: many people write that I shouldn't have been doing this at work and that this is exactly why they picked on me. Wrong, folks. People just don't understand what it's like to guard an empty office from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. There's at most 2 hours of actual work, patrols and checking keycards, the occasional phone call. You have to find something to do for the other 6 hours and not fall asleep. Most of my colleagues just killed time, watching TV, playing games, doing crosswords. Some were preparing for exams or writing their thesis. I originally chose this low-paying job precisely because it gave me time to read and write. They could only fire me for sleeping on the job or ignoring alarms, but not for what I did during the empty hours. I had a manager who openly disliked me and tried to get rid of me. Since there was nothing to criticize about my work, I was actually performing above average. He had to look for a reason elsewhere. And then one day, I was summoned to the main office. He was right there, along with some young HR intern who spent over half the meeting openly flirting with this total idiot, who, by the way, was actually married to the owner's daughter. And there they accused me of supposedly stealing electricity by charging my laptop. I replied that if they were going to accuse me, they should at least do it properly. There was no theft here. At most, it could be considered appropriation because the electricity was used in the area I was responsible for. And that's a much more serious matter, so I told them to handle everything by the book, suspend me, convene a disciplinary committee, and I'll get the union involved. After that, they immediately backed off and never bothered me with that nonsense again. Even though, in fact, all employees were charging their devices from the work outlets. By their logic, anyone could be accused of appropriating electricity. But the manager didn't let it go and put up a notice at the post: charging personal devices is prohibited. Okay, I started bringing a typewriter to work. It doesn't require electricity. and I also had an old Nokia that could hold a charge for several days. But my colleagues had smartphones that needed to be charged all the time. They quickly grew annoyed by this ban and began to openly complain as the wave of discontent spread to many other locations. In the end, management took down those signs and allowed us to charge our devices again, after which I calmly went back to using my iPad with a keyboard. A side note, the story about stealing electricity was originally just a provocation. The manager wanted to get under my skin so that I would lose my temper and he could fire me for insubordination. But it turned out the other way around. With my reaction, I actually pushed him to tighten those absurd rules, which only turned the rest of the staff against him. The discussions about the cost of electricity were completely beside the point. That wasn't what it was about. The accusation was deliberately ridiculous from the start, just to provoke a conflict. And one more thing. Here in the Netherlands, everything I write is my own intellectual property. Our employment contracts don't have any clause that would allow the company to claim income from the novel just because I wrote it during my regular work hours. My girlfriend spent 2 full years teaching me to say no more often, and then she asked me to look after her dog for a whole week. A bit of context is needed here. By nature, I'm the kind of person who always agrees to everything. It's not that I'm a complete pushover, it's just easier for me to say yes and go along than to argue and deal with the consequences. My girlfriend Claire really didn't like this. For about 2 years, she made it her mission to teach me to say no more often. She kept saying, "You have the right to your own preferences. Stop agreeing to things you don't actually want. Sometimes you can just say no. It doesn't cost you anything." She said this without any malice, with the best intentions. She would bring it up about once a month, sometimes more often. She even framed it as a matter of personal growth. She said she admired people who could calmly say no without feeling guilty. She was so consistent that something in me really started to change. I began to notice such moments, then started expressing doubts, and eventually sometimes even refused things. At first, it was small things. I refused a friend who wanted to borrow my charger for 3 days, told my cousin I wouldn't be able to come to his event. It felt unusual, but Claire was genuinely happy every time I told her about it. And then, at the end of February, Claire's friend needed someone to look after her dog for 8 days while she went to visit her family. Claire asked if I could take the dog in, and I want to emphasize I really thought it through, weighed the fact that it's a dog 8 days, that overall I'm uncomfortable when an animal stays at my place for a long time, and I remembered those 2 years of training for situations like this. In the end, I said no calmly, without guilt, without lengthy explanations. It just doesn't work for me. There was a pause. Claire stared at me. In just a few seconds, several emotions flashed across her face. She started to say something, stopped herself, and finally said, "That's not what I meant." I calmly replied that I understood, but she had been an excellent teacher, and I wanted her to know that her lessons hadn't been in vain. In the end, the dog was sent to a temporary shelter. Since then, since February, Claire never brought up the topic of, "You need to learn to say no" again. The boss herself said, "If the tasks become too much, let me know." And I did, right in front of everyone. Disclaimer. Apparently many people don't know what a virtuous mechanism is, so here's a brief explanation from AI. It's a self-sustaining positive cycle where each action improves the result and reinforces the next step. Such mechanisms create sustainable growth. Positive actions accumulate and produce an increasingly greater effect. They are often used in business strategy. Success fuels further success. To create it, you need to identify negative patterns, propose positive alternatives, and reinforce them until they become the norm. Next is malicious compliance. The story began 3 years ago when a new manager joined our department. I work in a large organization and I knew her from before. At first I was very happy about her arrival. She is a pragmatic person and knows how to launch positive cycles to improve the work environment. But about 6 months later, she started demanding more and more. The workload increased, there were more tasks, and sometimes priority was given to showy things instead of technical ones. I found myself under constant stress with no sense that it would ever end. The more work I actually completed, the more was demanded of me. Eventually, I began to complain about it, and she said, "It's your responsibility to tell me when you're overloaded. I give you tasks because you do them well, but if you want, I can assign them to another person on the team. Although I am fully aware that sometimes you just need a little push." For me, as someone with a good reputation and respect within the organization, it sounded like an attempt to shift the blame onto me. Classic gaslighting. From that moment, malicious compliance began. She gave me an unreasonable deadline to write instructions for a fully functioning, automatically updating dashboard, which, by the way, I had built from scratch myself in 2 weeks, while my colleagues couldn't make any progress for months. The task was assigned in the morning and it had to be completed by the evening. And this was on a day when she also organized an aperitif meeting near the office. I said it was impossible, and in response, without any explanation, I was told, "You have to do it." I decided to do things my own way. I worked on the instructions, went to that meeting, and when it was over, instead of going home like everyone else, I went back to my desk and kept working. It was important that she saw me there at 8:30. My boss actually did notice me and told me that I have a family, that I should go home, and that I could finish the instructions tomorrow, so I replied to her that I had already told her the deadline was completely unrealistic, but she did not listen to me at all. So now she will get the finished document before midnight tonight. And I did it. The next day, she called me in and said that I shouldn't have worked so late, that I should take better care of myself and my family. I replied, I said no, but you didn't accept it. This is the result. Thank you. In the end, she sent me to a coach so that they could teach me how to maintain a better, more sustainable work-life balance. The coach figured out the situation pretty quickly and realized that there was nothing wrong with me. So she suggested having a meeting with the three of us, me, her, and my boss. And that's when things got really interesting. My boss told the coach that people need to be pushed, otherwise they don't develop. To which the coach asked, so you're not satisfied with his work? And my boss immediately started saying that, actually, I'm the best employee in the department. At the next meeting, my coach looked at me and said directly, yeah, your boss is quite a piece of work. What you need isn't just to build a work-life balance, but to learn exactly how to set firm boundaries. After that, there were 8 coaching sessions where we analyzed real and hypothetical work situations and learned how to professionally phrase my refusals. Essentially, we practiced how to calmly and competently return her own words to her in a way that seemed completely justified. And very soon the perfect opportunity finally came up. At a general meeting, during a period when we were already overloaded with mandatory tasks, she assigned me 2 more new projects. I reply, do I understand correctly that you want me to take on these 2 projects, considering that we already have mandatory tasks A, B, C, D, E, F, and G? Alright, no problem. I'll start working on the new projects with a deadline of 6 months from now. It won't be possible any sooner. I need to maintain quality and keep a work-life balance. Cornered, she was forced to agree to my schedule. On several different occasions, she tried to push her agenda, but each time I calmly reminded her of our agreement. From that moment on, she stopped just dumping a mountain of additional responsibilities on me, at least not without first asking what I was currently working on, how busy I was, how much time the new task would take, and other similar considerations. A year passed. Now I'm running a project she doesn't even know about. I'm working on what really matters at my own pace, not all that nonsense she used to try to dump on me. She can't find fault with me. The results and optimization are obvious, efficiency has increased, and I've finally gotten my normal life back. Thank you, boss, for the professional coach you got for me at the company's expense. You wanted her to make me work at your intense pace. But instead, she taught me exactly how to put you in your place. Kisses. Did they ask you to compromise and then complain about it? Okay, we'll work strictly by the rules. I'm 33 years old. I used to work at a company that, among other things, produced one specific product. It was sold in decent volumes to several clients. The products were substantial in size and quite costly, but they had a relatively short lifespan, so it was possible to accurately forecast and predict well ahead of time when clients would order replacements. Let's call these clients Lombard and Orange. For each of these companies, the product was distinctly unique and specifically tailored, so when switching between them, we had to change the tooling and some of the production processes. In addition, at the final stage, we painted the products for Orange obviously in a bright orange color, while Lombard asked us to leave their specific units completely unpainted and in a raw state. They had some quirks regarding the rights to a specific shade, but that wasn't a problem. They painted everything themselves later. Lombard was a significantly larger company. Their orders usually exceeded Orange's volumes by about double the amount. The product life cycle was already very well understood, so we could adjust production in advance to match expected orders. One day, a small mix-up occurred. Lombard placed an order on behalf of a subsidiary company. It wasn't anyone's specific mistake, but the subsidiary's products were supposed to be yellow, and out of habit, we left the first batches unpainted just like we did for regular Lombard. Because of the design features, it was impossible to paint the already assembled products, so we simply put them in storage to wait for the next Lombard order and manufactured the required batches for Lombard Junior from scratch. No problem. And then, at some point, Orange reached out to us. They had some issues with their paperwork, and they urgently needed a small batch of products. According to the contract, the production time was 12 weeks, but in practice, thanks to our streamlined process, we usually managed to finish in about 4 weeks because we started production in advance. The problem was that their request came at a time when we were already up to our ears in production for Lombard, and it was difficult to just stop and switch over to Orange. We offered them 2 options. The first was to pay an additional 33% and we would start production immediately. Officially, the timeline would remain 12 weeks, but in reality, it would take about 6. The second option was to take products from those very same Lombard warehouse stocks without painting at the regular price right away, and we would additionally supply the missing components for almost a symbolic fee so they could replace everything themselves and paint them if they wished. Orange chose the second option. Everything was going great. We still had a small reserve left for Lombard. Orange was pleased that they could quickly resolve their issue and overall everyone benefited. Well, at least that's what we thought. After some time, management called us in for a meeting. We went there thinking we would be praised for helping a client in a difficult situation, or at the very least that they would acknowledge we had also cleared out some warehouse stock. Instead, we got chewed out. The top managers at Orange complained that the last shipment was incorrect and not in their color. And they officially recorded this in the customer satisfaction reports, which in our industry are open to everyone as part of ethical practice. So now, any company that wants to work with us will be able to see that Orange received products from us that were unpainted and in the wrong configuration. To say we were angry would be an understatement. It was that kind of quiet, simmering rage where you can tell everyone is fuming because a good result suddenly turned into a problem. Management listened to our explanations, looked at the screenshots of the correspondence where Orange themselves agreed to take the batch of Lombard, and acknowledged that we hadn't violated any rules. Moreover, they said that this process has long been streamlined and works well for us, which is why they never interfered. So they were all the more surprised that a complaint suddenly appeared. Formally, yes, we deviated from the contract by shipping non-standard products, but it was a rush order, and management understood that we were simply trying to help Orange even if they ended up setting us up. By the way, the idea of malicious compliance actually came from management themselves. From that moment on, everything for Orange had to strictly comply with the contract 100%, including deadlines. We were told to keep working as before, but not to send the finished products for Orange to them right away, instead to take them to a nearby warehouse. There, they were to remain until the full 12-week period had passed, and only on the very last day would they be shipped to the client. When we returned to the production floor, another surprise was waiting for us. While we were at the meeting, the management of Lombard contacted our superiors to once again emphasize that they were completely satisfied with the cooperation, as confirmed by their reports, and that it was a pleasure to work with our team. It seemed they wanted to make sure that the workflow wouldn't be changed, but in any case, we were very pleased to hear it. Our management saw this message later and forwarded it to us the next day. After that, we returned to work in the mode of strictly following the instructions. With Lombard, everything remained the same. Normal human interaction, calls where there was room for both business and casual conversation. With Orange, it was only business communication. No, how are you? No polite small talk, just facts and tasks. A few weeks passed, and Orange placed another order. Of course, they warned us in advance that it would be coming soon, but we simply replied, "We are waiting for the official order." At that very time, Lombard informed us that they wouldn't be placing any orders for a few more months, and their subsidiary wouldn't either. That's why we completed the order for Orange rather quickly, just 2 weeks out of the usual 12, and sent it to the warehouse. Remember, I mentioned that we usually manage to get it done in about 3 weeks? In the 3rd week, Orange asked when they could expect the delivery. We replied, "The lead time is 12 weeks. Well, yes, that's what it says in the contract, said the Orange representative. But when will you actually be able to ship it? 12 weeks from the order date, we answered. In the 4th week, Orange wrote again. They were already running out of their old stock and urgently needed new products. The answer was the same. The delivery time is 12 weeks. By the 5th week, Orange started to panic and asked us to focus all production on their order, to which we curtly replied, "Production is scheduled to be completed in the 12th week, as per the contract." A similar conversation was repeated in the 6th week and twice in the 7th. In the 8th week, they wrote that their current products were finally breaking down, and if we didn't deliver the new ones now, they would have to shut down their equipment because it couldn't operate without our product. I admit I took great pleasure in typing the response. Production is on schedule, completion is set for the 12th week. We are confident that we will meet the agreed delivery deadline. After that, everything continued in the same pattern. Constant reminders from Orange, and in the end, the truck delivered the products at 16:56 on the last day of the 12-week deadline. One of our guys, who had a truck driver's license, volunteered to deliver the order himself and even sent us photos on WhatsApp of him sitting in a cafe next to their factory an hour before the scheduled delivery. The following week, I was called to another meeting with the management. As expected, Orange filed a complaint, so management gathered all the documents to show that we had fully complied with every point of the contract. At the same time, we were told that Orange had to halt one of their largest projects for 3 weeks. This cost them a 6-figure sum in lost revenue. I wasn't present at the meeting with the top executives, but as I was later told, Orange was already preparing to go to the press. However, their enthusiasm instantly and noticeably faded when our management placed a copy of the contract in front of them with the key points highlighted. The delivery period is 12 weeks, the delivery was made on time, so there can be no claims against us. We fulfilled our obligations 100%. They were also reminded that a lawyer was present at the meeting, recording everything in case any defamatory statements appeared in the media. Orange simply had no way left to present the situation as if we had let them down. And management said directly, after the urgent order incident and their public complaint, this is exactly how we will be working from now on. By the way, after the meeting, one of the Orange representatives carefully examined the documents we gave them, including the product inspection reports, and was quite upset when he saw that they were dated 10 weeks before delivery. In other words, they could have received the products as early as the 2nd week. This point came up later, unofficially, during one of the work calls without management present. And we just smiled and reminded them about the 12-week deadline. I worked at that company for almost 2 more years. During that time, it became standard practice to send products for Orange to the warehouse and keep them there until the 12th week. Lombard and their subsidiaries still received their orders as quickly as possible once they were ready. When I left the company, this practice remained unchanged. Orange had to get used to placing orders 12 weeks in advance. Over time, this became standard practice for them. Their satisfaction ratings remained average, but since Lombard Jr. started placing a significant volume of orders and also appeared in public reports, their excellent reviews more than made up for Orange's ratings. At work, they promised a raise if an employee became bilingual. Consequently, I decided to learn Welsh. At one job, there was a specific company policy. If you spoke at least 2 languages, you received a 10% permanent salary increase. I've always had a knack for languages, but I never reached full fluency in any of them. Usually I know just enough to find myself getting into a bit of trouble. At my previous job, for example, I got in trouble for asking my boss, who always spoke to me in Spanish, to speak English instead. I asked her in German. She wrote me up for speaking a language she didn't understand and didn't even notice the irony. But then I got a job that I liked, and I saw this bonus for knowing languages. We don't have that many bilingual employees, and the job often requires traveling to places where people don't speak English. I decided that I wanted to learn the language of my ancestors and signed up for an online Welsh course. Of course, I didn't become fluent, but I did reach a conversational level where I could hold a basic conversation. It would have been even better if anyone around actually spoke Welsh. In the end, I went to HR to clarify whether I was entitled to the bonus. I had to pass a small assessment with a manager. I began explaining in Welsh that I could speak the language and that my family had been from Wales since 1745. The store manager eventually said that the policy actually meant Spanish, but since it wasn't specified anywhere within the official company rules and it just said bilingual, they were forced to honor their own terms, granted me a significant pay raise, and immediately rewrote the policy afterwards. I never actually needed Welsh at work, but sometimes I'm asked to help new employees who have trouble understanding customers with very heavy Cajun or thick Scottish accents. Fuck you all. Thank you very much for watching. Write in the comments below which story impressed you the most. If you're in bed right now listening to me before sleep, then good night and sweet dreams. And if not, well then buddy bro sis, see you tomorrow. Hugs, bye.